Welcome to the Ex Terra Podcast. The Ex Terra mission is to explore and discuss the business of space and its effect on the national and global economy, as well as life on Earth. How does what happens in space affect your life every day? That's what we're exploring on the Ex Terra website, as well as on this podcast. We're pleased to welcome back Simon Drake to the Ex Terra Podcast. Simon is president and CEO of the Space Commodities Exchange and founder of the Lunar Resources Registry. Simon, welcome back to the Ex Terra Podcast.
Tom, it's great to be back.
Today, we are going to focus on the Lunar Resources Registry. Give us an overview of your plan.
Plan of the Lunar Resources Registry is to enable public organizations like space agencies and even non-government organizations and commercial entities. So, for example, a space resources company, the ability to register on our platform their resources related activities so that they don't have an overlap or a geopolitical overlap as well. So, for example, if a company says we want to go to a certain crater and we want to, explore for a particular resource, we want to provide a registry that says, okay, company XYZ, you are at this crater and over here is another company. So we wanted a transparent, pro-commerce, pro-space agency platform to do this on.
So how does the Lunar Resources Registry integrate with the Space Commodities Exchange?
At the moment, there's not much integration, but the future integration is the resources that come from the lunar surface can one day go on to the Space Commodities Exchange and be tradable. That's the end game, and it might take 10 or 20 years to get there. But with all these great ideas, you have to set the framework up before you can start moving along in the direction, before you can start turning a project into an actual engineering operation.
You talk on your website about the need for another layer of cooperation on lunar resources. Why is there that need?
The need came about because the resources industry as we have it on Earth is, it is incredibly mature. And it's probably one of the most mature industries out there because it's been in operation for the longest. Resources, exploration and extraction and transport, we're going way back to, pre-Roman times. Right. So when we look at the moon as the next logical step for, Earth's, humanity's push out, it comes to the question of, well, what resources can be found on the lunar surface that can be utilized on the lunar surface? And how do you go about organizing that? Because there are resources on the lunar surface, but they're so interwoven with the regolith, or they might exist in, clumps, that they've suddenly become, very high value targets from a resource point of view. Now, as we have this space race, or maybe history will say it's just a mini space race, I don't know. As we do have renewed interest from major space players, obviously the US, Russia, India, China, Japan, Israel. And then, of course, you have the European Union, including the UK in this particular case. You have a lot of players circling around, looking at resources. And at this stage, they're looking at resources from a scientific point of view, but also from a geopolitical point of view, because these resources will enable operations to prolong themselves. For example, if you want to have a spacecraft doing a deep space mission, if you can refuel it from a resource that comes from the moon, it means you don't have to pick it up. You don't have to take it with you from Earth. Right. If you want to have some kind of permanent operation on the lunar surface, whether it's science or commercial, you need to extract resources from the lunar surface to build that.
So where does that layer of cooperation come in? What are you looking for as far as getting nations and or companies to work together?
For our goal is to offer a transparent platform where a company can, or a space agency can say, we want to do X and Y activity in a particular location.
Mm-hmm.
So our company will register that and say, okay, well, we acknowledge that you are going to do this particular exploration for this particular resource in that particular location. Therefore, it's off limits to another company who wants to do the same thing there. It's kind of like dividing up the pie, if you could say. And by doing it in a transparent method with space agencies, we can have a better way of dispute resolution and understanding what resources are there, and enabling companies to, let's say, an energy company that wants to hedge in the future on a particular resource that may be extracted from the surface of the moon. We also follow the framework of existing space laws. For example, you can't own a piece of asteroid or a piece of the moon, but US space mining laws in Luxembourg, and I think UAE as well, do have provisions where if you extract a resource, they do recognize that.
What kind of cooperation do you expect from nations? And it just occurs to me that, okay, you've got this Lunar Resources Registry, and you say this company has access to this particular spot on the moon, and then there might be I don't know, communist Chinese government that says, we don't care what you say, we're going there anyway.
Yeah, I've had many conversations about this. The cooperation that I see as an end goal for the Lunar Resources Registry is that it's neutral and that it's accepted, at least at face value, by nations as one way of solving a potential problem. And I know that there's one argument that says, well, if a country gets there first, then actually good on them, they've done it.
Yeah.
So in my mind, you can't make a registry entry unless you have an active plan on pursuing it, right? Particularly if you're a space agency. Otherwise, you might have someone call me up and say, "Hey, I know you're doing your beta registry. I want to reserve half of the moon." It can't work like that. Right. It has to work on a location-based system of okay, you want to reserve the right to explore a particular location. Why do you want to do it? And you just can't open the floodgates.
Right.
It has to be a very measured approach. And by that measured approach, in time you will see, from a geopolitical point of view and a commercial point of view, the zoning of the lunar surface, it will take its own shape and form. And that, I think, will be the most interesting thing from a historical perspective. But our goal is just to be a registry. It's not to oversell or undersell something. It's just to be a registry and provide order. Because if you look back at history,
I got some prime Florida real estate that you really need to see.
Yeah. It's the history of the French and the British, and their respective empires, the shenanigans. Do we want that on the surface of the moon? Do we want US, China, India, Europe, all kind of butting heads over very specific prized resource locations, when you could act quite easily, with a bit of forethought, work out a way of saying, all right, well, there is enough for everybody, and you just need to have particular zones of operations. And the zones of operations is very important because when a craft, land descends or takes off from the lunar surface, because of the low gravity, it kicks up a lot of debris. And that debris will float along. So it's not like on Earth where you might have two mines, 5 kilometers apart. You need that distance between them. And you see that with the Artemis Accords, talking about, particular zones required around existing landing sites, so that no one says, oh, I'm going to land my, my Starship, 1 kilometer away from the Apollo landing site, and that can't happen or shouldn't happen. Yeah.
And we'll talk about those heritage zones here in a little bit. What kind of the primary resources are available on the moon? What are people going to go there and try to find?
That is the big debate raging at the moment.
Okay.
And the academics who probably know the most paint a very let's say academic picture, and then the entrepreneurs paint a different picture, and then space agencies, we shall know them by their deeds, paint a different picture. So I try and look at where have the space agencies landed and what missions are they planning. So one example is ESA is planning to go to the South Pole and drill in a shadowed crater to find out the truth about water, or frozen water, to be honest. So that is one point of data where you say, okay, well, the goal from a space agency point of view is water. I think the last Chinese lander, Chang'e 4, 5, was landed on the dark side of the moon, so the far side. So what were they after? And then you have the massive amounts of data from orbiters, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, Indians, Japanese. You have this data where you can now download it and look at it from a layered point of view and try and peek down and say, okay, well, where are the resources that have been detected, and what inferences can you make about that? Then there is the old favorite, the helium-3, question of, this is the energy source of the future. Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, from a technology point of view, we're not there yet in any way. No one's got any shovel ready to to turn up the lunar regolith, and no one's got the energy source there at the moment to bake oxygen out of regolith or whatever you want. At the moment, we are, in terms of exploration, just peeking into the data, trying to work out where specific locations are that would warrant sending a device of some kind to actually test the regolith.
What kind of buy-in are you experiencing in establishing this registry? Are companies and nations in agreement that this kind of thing is needed?
It is early stage, and we have been accepted into a European Space Agency Business Incubation Center to build and develop the platform. And we haven't been pushing it as of yet because we're still building a registry platform. And as you build it, it starts to take shape and form, and that then enables us to say how we can approach space agencies and commercial companies to be part of this registry. So we haven't actually had buy-ins. We don't actually have investors. As a co-founder, I'm obviously a major shareholder. But I think that will come, and it's a question of trying to work out the business model and does it fit into a potential investor's mandate.
I don't know if I was talking so much about investment, but just kind of intellectual buy-in. Are they open to the concept of having a central registry for establishing mining claims on the moon?
Yes, the people I talk to, they say, and I've talked to people who may have worked in commodities trading or aerospace scientists who understand the mechanics of getting to the moon and back or not. Talk to in situ resource utilization professionals, and they understand that there has to be something at some stage to where you can register your intent to do it. So there is considerable interest from that side. From the commercial side, I think that will come as we are able to present more compelling reasons to register on this platform. But at the moment, we do get a lot of pushback from people saying, the US has Space Force, and China won't really care what you do anyway. But that doesn't, as an entrepreneur and an inventor and a business operator, it doesn't actually bother me, because I'm like, well, actually, we're still going to build a platform. We're still going to build a registration platform. And it's only as good as how far we can push it and the feedback we get and the cooperation we get to be on it. And the goal is to solve a problem. And that problem will be that countries, companies, will be vying for, locations, convenient locations. It might be on the equator, or it might be in a sunlit area. And there needs to be somebody somewhere that sits above politics, but, a bit below full commercialization, that is the arbitrator, and essentially a registry, transparent and neutral.
We're talking with Simon Drake, President and CEO of the Space Commodities Exchange and founder of the Lunar Resources Registry, on the Ex Terra Podcast. Simon, how are you identifying the potentially resource-rich areas on the lunar surface?
At the moment, we use existing data that has been freely available, and we put them in layers, and look at areas and say, okay, look at the terrain, look at the formation of the moon, look at impact areas from craters, and infer resources that could be there. And this enables us to say, okay, if we come up with locations where we assume that there are particular resources in existence, then that could become a location of interest to actually send a device to ground truth a certain location.
Right.
So at the moment we are data based, and that's just the life of a Lunar Resources Registry is that's where we're at that in the year 2021. Right. And the more data that comes in and we can collect, the greater the registry is. Yet our goal is not to be the master of lunar data, because our goal is just to be a registry. But more data helps us understand what locations are of value and what locations aren't.
But of course, nothing is guaranteed. That's why they call it prospecting.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is it is prospecting. At this stage, if you're looking at resources,
a long way away.
Yeah, it's you're dependent on data sources. Now that can change in the hopefully not too far away future, where you could start building business models and saying, let's organize enough capital to send, I don't know, 4 CubeSats with hyperspectral imaging, and position them in low lunar orbits in order to scan particular resource locations and verify what has already been picked up in freely available data.
Right.
That way you can add another layer of certainty.
How will the mining claims be protected?
First of all, by their difficulty to get there. There's that. For us as a registry platform, we look at it as say if a mining company said we want to register a potential zone for the processing of iron out of regolith. The first level of protection would be the precedent that by having a transaction that you wanted to do it, that forms in a very slim legal sense, a transaction forms a commitment and a relationship that you wanted to do it. And then as you build a business case on it, in a legal sense, that becomes more of a case that you are serious about it. That is one level of protection. In terms of other protection, like physical protection, unless there's something I don't know about, that there is no real way to physically protect something on the lunar surface. Enough countries have lost a certain bit of their prestige by watching their lunar craft crash rather than do their obvious task. So it's still a hard environment, and we're a long way from actually having to physically protect zones. We're not back in the days of the 18th century and the British and the French, with frigates on the high seas and things like that.
So what are the laws and treaties that are governing mining on the moon, or you anticipate will govern those activities?
The most obvious law comes from the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and to summarize it, you can't own anything in space. It's there for the common good. So you use that as a cornerstone. And then you look at the US, Luxembourg, space mining laws, where they kind of say, well, if you do extract something as a resource, we do recognize it.
Right.
Now there is a precedent. I think there was a particular Antarctic law that didn't actually get used about mining the Antarctica. There's different laws to do with the laws relating to unexplored territory, which we're talking precedents set way back when there used to be unexplored territory.
Right.
So going forward, I think that the easiest way is to look at existing space-related laws, looking at policy coming out about space mining, and working out a roadmap with all these particular frameworks in conjunction with your objective. So the objective is, okay, at some stage, companies will see the profit in exploring and extracting resources on the moon, and therefore how to get there, they'll have to navigate the roadmaps of existing space policy, laws, and up-and-coming treaties.
A few minutes ago, we talked about heritage areas. What are lunar heritage areas, and why do they need to be protected?
Lunar heritage areas, in the first case, are the early exploration of particularly the US and the Soviets. And these locations, they're there, but they're pretty much untouched unless they've been, hit by something. Yeah. And when you go forward and you say, okay, well, there's going to be increased activity around the moon, the first thing anybody would want to do that could go into a low lunar orbit is try and visit an existing landing site. Think of the media sensation.
Sure.
But it's very dangerous to say, well, they can start landing there, or even if you wanted to land a very small lander near an existing, Apollo site,
right,
or the Soviet lunar sites. When these craft land, they're going to kick up debris. Depending on how close they are, the debris can impact on the existing landers, and they are part of history. These existing sites, sure. So they are a heritage. And like any heritage area, they need a level of protection. This is covered in the Artemis Accords. And if you extrapolate from that, from a registry point of view, we're building that in anyway.
Right.
That existing locations are heritage zones. And the interesting thing is, to me, it also includes zones where countries didn't quite land, but let's just say they had a
rapid,
an abrupt
unscheduled disassembly, as Elon Musk might say.
Yeah, and you look at those locations and you say, well, actually, that is to me a registration for that particular country. At least they tried, and then from there you actually start building the framework for a registry. Yeah.
But I can foresee a time when our great-great-great-grandchildren might want to, we went to the Apollo 11 site on vacation. It's just one of those things that you hope happens one day.
Yeah, well, that could happen if they could land, 5 kilometers away in a controlled environment, and then do a big long moonwalk.
Or the rover will take them, or whatever it is. But
on a bumpy ride. Yeah, I mean, in the future, all these things are possible. Right now we're kind of in an advantageous position where you can start to lay the frameworks for the interaction with heritage sites.
Yeah.
So as to not get in a position where a site becomes, so worn down that it kind of loses its meaning.
Back to reality.
or back to Stonehenge, it's built of stone,
Exactly. But what does a company have to do to register a claim on the moon with the Lunar Resources Registry? If somebody came to you and said, here's what we want to do, here's what we want to do it, what's the process?
The process, first of all, is to make contact, which is easy to do. And then there comes a process of finding out exactly what they want and why they want it and how committed they are to it. Because the last thing we want is an avalanche of prospectors.
Right.
And at the moment, we limit prospectors, or registrants commercially to companies. So we don't want to be in the position of, individuals knocking on our door saying, I want to,
yeah. You don't want a gold rush.
Well, we do want a gold rush.
Yes.
But in a controlled manner.
Okay.
Yeah. There's nothing like a gold rush to spur innovation and economic activity. But yeah, back to who, how, why, these things need to be worked out and understand their seriousness to their registration. Because to me, a registration, it can be, for a fixed period of time with conditions.
Right.
So you might have a company register a particular location, and if they don't renew it after a certain period of time, it therefore lapses.
Right.
We want to avoid a situation where, some big entity, carves it all up and, and leaves nothing but, the rubble behind. And that doesn't make sense from a capitalist sense point of view, because as a registry, we have to have a business model that keeps going. We don't want to have a registry where we kind of sell ourselves out to the highest bidder and then it's game over, close the shop. It has to be an ongoing thing.
Is there going to be a registration fee?
Definitely, because the electricity that runs our computing power doesn't come for free. So, yeah, there has to be fees involved, because otherwise you'll get an avalanche of spectators and prospectors. No, it has to be very serious.
So, Simon, kind of in closing, what kind of timeline are you forecasting for practical extraction of resources on the moon?
Before the practical extraction comes the actual further probing of locations from orbiting craft, and then a next wave of craft sent to specifically observe locations. And then you can have the testing of locations, so you can land a particular craft that can test the regolith and things. And even then, we're not there yet with that technology. So the extraction is still way off. And let's just say 10 years at least, I think. Now, I'm not saying that this hasn't been invented.
Right.
Okay. Because, you can look it up. There's NASA's got some great technology, and they do great challenges of, you look it all on YouTube where companies are doing, and students are making, mechanical contraptions to deal with the strangeness of regolith. We're not on Earth anymore. So the engineering is there, but the locations to me is still yet to be decided, and exactly what you want out of it. And from a mining point of view, I know I have my bias, on how I think mining works on Earth. But when you start going down the rabbit hole of what it means to be mining on the moon, it's another world, pardon the pun, but
quite literally.
It is. When you look at what its structure is, and what regolith is, it's basically pulverized asteroids and meteorites. And then if you want to go deep into the under the surface of the lunar surface, then you're talking about underground mining, which is a completely different engineering supply chain. Now back to the surface, and getting into regolith, you're talking about processing regolith. So you're talking about baking it, or using a lot of high-powered energy to extract what you want out of it, whether it's a gas or a particular mineral. So we are a long way away, although you can look up a lot of the work that I know ESA has been doing work on extracting oxygen out of regolith, but that's still in the laboratory. I think for us, a success would be that through a registry, space resources companies can use a registration as a benchmark to then raise capital to send to specific locations the technology required to test regolith, and say, okay, in this particular location, we can extract, this much
and
oxygen out of this much regolith.
Right.
But that can just start to form a business model, and this is the slow grind of it. It's a bit slow and grueling, but that's the reality that we as humanity faces in going to the next planet. It was never meant to be easy.
Right.
If it was a watery moon, that would be so much more easier. Like imagine that.
But Simon, we are out of time, and sort of like mining regolith, we've barely scratched the surface. I do appreciate you coming back to join us on the Ex Terra Podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast. Find us on the web at xterrajsc.com. And be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on Twitter at xterrajsc. Until next time, I'm Tom Patton. Thanks for listening.